In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and 17, we read, "Brothers and sisters, watch carefully how you live, not as foolish persons, but as wise, making the most of the opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not continue in ignorance, but try to understand what is the will of the Lord." And as I thought about that, you're probably asking, why do you have pictures of fish up there? Well, because it's time for another fish story, that's why. And as I thought about that, I was reminded of the difference, right? Of working from a place of knowledge versus working from a place of ignorance, like when we first start out in a new skill or a new journey. Those are two different areas of operation. And so I went to the tubes out by the Fall River shortly before I had my surgery, and something wonderful happened. For the first time in my 2-year fly fishing journey, I was the more experienced fisherman on the bank. It was epic, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, when I got there, there was a younger fisherman there standing by the bank, and he was fishing away. And I said, "So how's the fishing going today?" He said, "I haven't caught anything." I said, "Okay." So I walked along the bank, and I was kind of peeking down into the water, and I saw some trout here and there. And then I saw this nice shady spot. And what I've learned in 2 years of fishing is that the trout really like to hide out in the shady spots because they don't have to worry about the birds coming in and getting them. There was some logs down in the water, a place where you would get your hook caught up, but they like that too because there's more protection. I thought this is a good place to fish. So I started fishing there with that little teeny tiny black zebra midge that's about this big. And within a period of an hour, I had 5 huge trout about this big. The picture doesn't even do it justice. That's a big net, you guys, okay? If it was this big, it was this big, okay? And so the young man comes over and he's like, "What are you using?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm using this little zebra midge, you know? But it's not just about what I'm using. It's where I'm using it, how I'm using it." And I'm like, "This is what you need to do." So I started to tell him everything he needed to do to catch fish today at this spot. And then since I had already caught 5, I was being a good guy. I was like, "Here, take the spot, use it, try it, put on." I'm like, "What are you using exactly right now?" And he pulls up his line. He's got this honking huge hook. I'm like, "You're not going to catch anything with that but logs." I'm like, "Here," I gave him some stuff. I was like, have at it. And so I gave him the knowledge he needed to be successful that day. But it's really up to him to take that knowledge and apply it, right? And that's really the way it is with us. When we're trying to move from kind of being a little ignorant about a skill to having some knowledge about it and to work from a place of knowledge. There's a big difference, right? And what I'm getting at is that understanding how something works makes a huge difference, right? So it just stands to reason that spiritually it's the same thing. And when we're trying to understand the will of God for our lives personally, I think we need to understand the power of the Eucharist as true food, right? That the Eucharist for the soul, it imparts grace because it's a sacrament. That means it's a means of grace. The Eucharist is going to impart grace, and that's going to make us more fruitful in the things that God has called us to do, whether it's fishing or being a doctor or a lawyer. I thought that'd be funnier. Or whatever we might be. Whatever we might be that God has called us to do, it's gonna make us more fruitful in that. And in the Old Testament reading, we see in Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 to 5, how we're given guidance from the Lord to go from a spiritual ignorance to more of a place of knowledge and wisdom. So we read in Proverbs 9, 1 through 5, "Wisdom has built her house. She has set up her columns. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the heights out over the city. Let whoever is simple turn in here. To the one who lacks understanding, she says, come and eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed." Now, did you notice that wisdom in this passage is quite personified? It's personified. She's built her house. She has set up her columns and sent out her maidens. And interestingly enough, in ancient teaching, there is talk of the 7 virtues as being 7 columns of wisdom that lead us into righteousness. And we talk about ongoing sanctification. How do we become more Christ-like and more saint-like? The virtues, the 7 virtues can lead us into that. And so in ancient art, oftentimes we see the 7 virtues depicted as 7 maidens in old churches and things like that. And so what are the 7 virtues? I'm so glad you asked, because guess what? This is not a class they teach the kids in school anymore. When's the last time you heard a kid come home and say, hey, guess what? We're learning about the 7 virtues today. No, that's alarming, right? But the 3 theological virtues are faith, hope, and charity. And then there's 4 cardinal virtues that Saint Thomas Aquinas talks about. And those are temperance, prudence, justice, and courage. And we need those 7 virtues. We need to think about how we're in excess or in deficiency of those 7 virtues to help in our spiritual journey. But I want you to notice something else about this passage that I believe is the overarching, way more important aspect of this particular passage. And that is where it says that you should come and eat of my food and drink of my wine. Because I believe that is a foreshadowing in the Old Testament of the Eucharist and the body and blood of Christ. So the key to the success here, as we're moving in sanctification and we're understanding the idea of the Eucharist as the true food, is that as we engage the virtues and we try to live into them, we need the fortification and the journey of the Eucharist to help us along with that. We need the body. We need the blood. We need, what is that? The presence of Christ in our life to guide us and direct us. But it's not enough, just to teach the virtues. Because I could share fishing knowledge all day long with somebody, right? It's not enough just to teach it. There has to be a yearning for it, a desire for it in your life. Like somebody could tell me all day long how to fish, but unless I really want those fish bad enough, I'm never going to implement any of that knowledge. I'm not going to go through the work to try. I might do it for a couple weeks or a couple months, but pretty soon, if I don't have a longing in my heart to catch fish, I'm just going to give up and walk away. And so it's not enough just to have knowledge about something. There has to be a yearning for it. And that's really what I love about what Matthew Kelly says in the book that we're studying today, Beautiful Eucharist. Matthew Kelly says on page 95, as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men to gather the wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. They will naturally build the ship anyway. And if we apply this to our Old Testament reading and the idea of striving in these virtues, what do we need to yearn for to make us successful? It's Christ's presence. It's a relationship with God that these virtues are going to help us in our path towards. And so we need this yearning. We need this yearning for Christ's presence through the Eucharist so that we can move from a place of gaining knowledge to a place of applying wisdom, going from ignorance to wisdom as we receive God's presence and His influence in our life. And I think once we knock on the door and continue to practice those virtues strengthened by the Eucharist, Christ's presence, equipped by that imparting grace within our soul, then we're going to understand what Christ is saying in our gospel reading today. And so we read in John 6:55 through 56, for my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I remain in them. A constant, ongoing knowledge and awareness of the presence of Christ and His guiding Spirit in our lives, helping us with every single step we take. That's the quickest way, I believe, to go from ignorance to wisdom spiritually, to understand that we have Christ's very Spirit indwelling us, that His very Spirit is guiding us in the virtues. He's leading us. He's empowering us. And we should never take this journey on our own. So it's not enough to get the teaching. It's not even enough to yearn to implement it and seek God's guidance. We have to rely on Christ for the help we need to be successful in that walk. Because there's many times in my own life that I've fallen short because I wasn't leaning on Christ the way I should. And so we need to depend on Christ, His presence, His grace. And so as we come to the table today to receive Christ's body and blood in the Eucharist, I'm asking you, what do you need to be nourished? Where do you need Christ's presence in your life? How do you need His grace imparted to you? And I want you to get in your head how you need that, and what areas of your life it could be useful for you in this particular season of your journey. And as you walk up, I want you to walk up expecting Christ to meet you through the Eucharist in that need, so that you can walk away fortified by Christ's presence, understanding how His love is working in you.